In Xi'an, China, there is a massive tomb, a burial chamber that has been sealed for 2,000 years. Protecting this ancient necropolis is an army of 8,000 strong, frozen in time. Inside the tomb, they say, you will find many amazing things, rare artifacts and wonderful treasures, engineered rivers of mercury used to simulate the 100 rivers, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the Great Sea. A ceiling covered in representations of the heavenly constellations, a floor made to look like the geography of the land. You will find candles supposedly made from the fat of mermaids, which are calculated to burn for a very long time. Mechanical crossbows aimed at the door, waiting for anyone foolhardy enough to enter. And the bodies of the people who built the tomb, who upon its completion were sealed inside. And of course, you will find the body of a man who tried very hard not to die, a man who sent travelers great distances to search for elixirs of immortality. That man is the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. We shall talk about him in a bit, but for now, let's pause here, at the end of his story, on this thought. There is an irony of a man who wished to live forever, finding a sort of immortality through the legendary status of his burial chamber. This sort of cosmic irony is the type of thing you'd expect to find in a fairy tale or folk story, from the wishes granted by the jinn in Aladdin's magical lamp to the curse of King Midas. There is a theme in many folk tales, myths and legends that can be summed up with the idea that even if you get what you want, it doesn't always end up quite as you imagined, or to put it in simpler terms, be careful what you wish for. The term monkey's paw has become so ingrained in pop culture that before I looked into it, I assumed it was an old folktale, something you'd find in the stories of 1001 Nights. But surprisingly, the tale is not particularly old. It was written as a short story in 1902 by W. Jacobs. For those who've never heard the original tale, let me give you a quick recap. One night, a couple, Mr. and Mrs. White, and their adult son Herbert, are visited by an old friend. The visitor is an officer in the British Army who has recently returned from India. With him, the Sergeant Major brings a mummified monkey's paw. He shows the ghoulish artifact to his old friends whilst explaining that it holds a dark magic. It will grant 3 wishes, but it will do so devilishly, causing horrible consequences. The paw ends up in the possession of Mr. White, and somewhat reluctantly, he uses it to wish for £200 to pay off his mortgage. The next day, the White son Herbert dies in a horrific accident. The company that Herbert works for offers a £200 bereavement payment. After the funeral, Mrs. White, stricken with grief, pleads with Mr. White to use the power of the paw to wish for their son to be returned to them. Mr. White, now seeing the cruel streak in the paw's magic, tries to argue against its use, imagining some terrifying reanimated husk instead of his lost son. But Mrs. White makes such a passionate plea that he acquiesces and makes the wish, which brings us to the end of the story, which I'll read for you now. His wife sat up in bed listening. A loud knock resounded through the house. "It's Herbert," she screamed, "it's Herbert." She ran to the door, but her husband was before her and, catching her by the arm, held her tightly. "What are you going to do?" he whispered hoarsely. "It's my boy, it's Herbert," she cried, struggling mechanically. "I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go. I must open the door." "For God's sake, don't let it in," cried the old man, trembling. "You're afraid of your own son," she cried, struggling. "Let me go. I'm coming, Herbert, I'm coming." There was another knock, and another. The old woman, with a sudden wrench, broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed her to the landing and called after her, appealingly. As she hurried downstairs, he heard the chain rattle back and the bottom bolt drawn slowly and stiffly from the socket. Then the old woman's voice, strained and panting. "The bolt," she cried loudly. "Come down, I can't reach it." But the husband was on his hands and knees, groping wildly on the floor in search of the paw. If only he could find it before the thing got inside. A perfect fusillade of knocks reverberated through the house, and he heard the scraping of a chair as his wife put it down in the passage against the door. He heard the creaking of the bolt as it came slowly back, and, at the same moment, he found the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking ceased suddenly, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chair drawn back and the door opened. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, and a long, loud wail of disappointment and misery from his wife gave him courage to run down to her side. and then to the gate beyond. The street lamp flickering opposite shone on a quiet and deserted road. This desire to hoodwink the gods of death, to grant yourself one more go-round on the ride, is an ancient pursuit, and of course, we see it in Greek myth. Take poor Tithonus. We read of his story in the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite. For context, a long time ago, Eos, the goddess of the dawn, fell in love with the mortal Tithonus, and so enraptured were the two that Eos could not bear the thought that one day her love would travel up the river Styx and away from her, while she, an immortal, would be left alone with only bittersweet memories. So, she decided to go ask Zeus, king of the gods, to grant her love eternal life. I'll let Homer take over from here. And she went to ask the dark-clouded son of Cronus that he should be deathless and live eternally. And Zeus bowed his head to her prayer and fulfilled her desire. Too simple was queenly Eos. She thought not in her heart to ask youth for him and to strip him of the sloth of deadly age. So while he enjoyed the sweet flower of life, he lived rapturously with golden-throned Eos, the early-born, by the streams of the ocean, at the ends of the earth. When the grey hairs began to ripple from his comely head and noble chin, queenly Eos kept away from his bed, though she cherished him in her house and nourished him with food and ambrosia and gave him rich clothing. But when loathsome old age pressed full upon him, and he could not move, nor lift his limbs, this seemed to her in her heart the best counsel. She laid him in a room, and put to the shining doors. There he babbles endlessly, and no more has strength at all, such as once he had in his supple limbs. You see, in asking for eternal life, but not eternal youth, her act of love accidentally became an act of torture. Tithonus ended up living a painful, eternal life, losing everything by his heartbeat, presumably wishing for death. The story, as with many others, is mirrored in a Roman myth, the Cumaean Sibyl. We read her story in Ovid's Metamorphosis. We enter the tale when the hero Aeneas meets a Sibyl. A Sibyl is a prophet or an oracle, and he asks her to take him to Avernus, which is the underworld. We read, "He entered the cave of the Sibyl, and asked to go down to Avernus to find his father's ghost. Then the Sibyl, after remaining for a long time with her eyes gazing at the earth, lifted them at last, filled with the frenzy of the gods, and cried, 'You ask great things, man of great achievements, whose hand has been tested by the sword, whose faith has been tested by the fire, but have no fear, Trojan. You will have what you desire, and with me as your guide, you will know the halls of Elysium, the earth's strangest realm, and the likeness of your dear father. To virtue no way is barred.' As he travelled the fearful road through the shadow twilight, he said, 'Whether you are truly a goddess, or only most beloved by the gods, you will always be like a goddess to me, and I will acknowledge myself in your debt. You have allowed me to enter the place of the dead, and having seen that place of the dead escape it. When I reach the upper air, I will build a temple to you for this service, and burn incense in your honour.' The priestess gazed at him with a deep sigh, and said, 'I am not a goddess. Do not assume any human being is worth the honour of holy incense, or air out of ignorance. I was offered eternal life without end if I would surrender my virginity to Phoebus, my lover. While he still hoped for it, while he desired to bribe me beforehand with gifts, he said, 'Virgin of Cumae, choose what you wish, and what you wish you shall have.' Pointing to a pile of dust that had collected, I foolishly begged to have as many anniversaries of my birth as were represented by the dust. But I forgot to ask that the years should be accompanied by youth. He gave me the years and lasting youth as well, if I would surrender. I rejected Phoebus's gift and never married. But now my more fruitful time has turned its back on me, and old age comes with tottering step. That must be long endured. Though I have now lived 7 centuries, 300 harvests, 300 vintages still remain to be seen to equal the content of the dust. The time will come when the passage of days will render such body as I have tiny, and my limbs, consumed with age, will reduce to the slightest of burdens. I will be thought never to have loved, and never to have delighted a god. Phoebus too, perhaps, will either not know me or deny that he loved me. I will go as far as having to suffer transformation, and I will be viewed as non-existent, but still known as a voice. The fates will bequeath me a voice. So now we return to the story of Qin Shi Huang, whose burial mound we spoke of earlier. He was the first emperor of China, and he was obsessed with becoming immortal. It's said that he was preoccupied and terrified of death. We read in Sima Quan's records of the Grand Historian, the first emperor hated the word death, and none of his ministers dared to mention it. And then the first emperor said, "I admire the immortal, and call myself the immortal, not I." He famously sent out many, such as Zhu Fu, on expeditions to find the fabled islands of the immortals, where he thought he could obtain the elixir of life, but to no avail. We further read in the records of the Grand Historian, and full disclosure, I'm using an online translator to translate a public domain source that's written in traditional Chinese, so I apologise if there's any slight mistakes in this. Before I collected all the books in the world and discarded the useless ones, I summoned many scholars of literature and alchemy in order to restore peace. The alchemists wanted to practice to find a miraculous medicine, which I assume to mean the elixir of mortality. Now I hear Han Zhong has left without reporting, and Zhu Fu and others spent countless riches, but still couldn't find the medicine. Ironically, Qin Shi Huang died at the relatively young age of 47. It's suggested in the History of China by David Curtis Wright that perhaps his overingestion of mercury, as prescribed as an elixir of immortality by his alchemists, may have been what killed him. Keep in mind in all this though, that Sima Quan, the author that gives us the account of the first emperor's search for the magical elixir, was writing during the Han dynasty, which succeeded the Qin dynasty, and as such it would benefit the Han not to show Qin Shi Huang in the best light, so maybe take his account with a pinch of salt. At least that's what I've read some people say online. I'm by no means an expert in this, which you can probably tell by my pronunciation of the names in this. Apologies for any of those I'm not getting correct, by the way. Interestingly, there's a similar nuance in the historic telling of another famous searcher for the tonic of eternal life, the sailor Ponce de Leon, in his quest for the fountain of youth. The story that I, and perhaps you, have heard before is of a Spanish conquistador travelling through Florida in search of a magical fountain with the powers to wash away old age from those who bathed in it. However, this tale comes from Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo, and as noted in a Smithsonian Magazine article written by Matthew Shea, Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo disliked Ponce, contending that he was gullible, egocentric, and dull-witted, so perhaps again it's worth considering taking a grain of salt with the tales. Either way, author Frederick A. Ober took Oviedo's and other accounts of Ponce's life in his book Juan Ponce de Leon, and in that book we read how Ponce came to learn of the Fountain of Youth. He writes, "One day there was brought to him a Carib woman from the hills of Lequillo, who related the story of a war canoe that left for a voyage to the northern islands and never returned. The Caribs who sailed it were kinsmen of hers, who, having heard of an island containing a wonderful fountain, the waters of which had the power of restoring youth to aged people, went off in search for it. As they never came back, she reasoned they must have found the fountain of rejuvenescence, for they were valorous, braves, and skillful sailors, who could not have been detained against their will by man or tempest. The governor questioned the woman closely and found her firm in the belief that there was a wonderful island filled with rare delights, wherein was a spring that gushed forth in an unfailing stream, to bathe in which was to receive the gift of perennial youth. It was called, she said, Bimini, and was far north in the chain of islands now known as the Bahamas. Rumours of the existence of Bimini and the spring of perennial youth had reached his ears before, but being vague, they had not impressed him like the story of the Carib, for she could guide him thither. War-worn veteran that he was, his wealth at his command sufficient for many years to come, he desired now a prolonged rest from his labours. If he could renew in his exhausted frame the vigour of youth, how much it would mean to him. Ponce de Leon, like the other searchers we've heard of today, didn't find the secret to eternal youth. He didn't even find the island of Bimini, instead landing in Florida, naming the land that he believed to be an island, Pascua Florida, which is the Spanish name for an Easter celebration, as Ponce de Leon first saw the land near Easter time. Now we just say Florida. But of course, just because Ponce de Leon has become most recently associated with the Fountain of Youth, he's not the only historical figure connected to it. There are tales of Prester John, the fabled Christian king in the East, who was said to preside over a kingdom of riches and wonders, one such wonder being a fountain of youth. And even Alexander the Great was supposedly looking for the great spring of eternal life. Interestingly though, according to the Alexander Romans, though he travelled to the land of darkness looking for it, the great Alexander never found the well of never-dying men. But he did find the well of youth. Yet, as recounted by Robert Steele, he refused to drink from it. We read, Then he came to the Well of Youth, and it was in a dry land where no man dwelt, for there was no river or tree near. And Alexander would fain have the old man bathed in that well, but he would not, for he said it was good to be young once, and to be foolish once, but to be young twice would be to be always a fool. And old age was best when a man was tired of life, so the young men bathed in the spring, and their hearts grew hopeful, and they rejoiced in their youth. Of course, there are similar historical pursuits, like the many searches for the Philosopher's Stone, an object said to grant both gold transmutation and eternal life. Famously, alchemists like Nicholas Flamel were said to have discovered this artifact, though of course, and I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot here, but this story may have some historical inaccuracies, as it wasn't until almost 200 years after his death that Flamel started being documented as an alchemist who discovered the Philosopher's Stone, so again, massive pinch of salt with that one. Okay, as we're beginning to develop unhealthy sodium levels here, I'd like to reframe things a little bit. I think it's worth remembering that these stories, whether real, embellished, or apocryphal, are still valid and interesting, because in their telling and continued legacy, I think we learn something about ourselves. We recount these stories from long ago because they capture a desire we can all relate to. That is, to quote Dylan Thomas, to not go gentle into that good night. It's a feeling that's both ancient and very up to date. At the turn of the century, with the development of modern medicine, the belief that man could control his longevity became something of a truth. Today, the mercury poisoning that killed Qin Shi Huang could likely be cured, so too the typhoid fever that likely brought down the great Alexander. But all medicines are not alike. Even relatively recently, we were buying modern-day elixirs of vitality. I mean, even today, if you look at the fitness side of the internet, you will find all sorts of powders and tonics being sold with dubious medical claims. The salesmen of these products are really no different to the travelling medicine men who would tour the United States in the early 20th century, shilling their panaceas or cure-all tonics that would claim to fix all sorts of ailments.
That no matter what your ailment, my friend, no matter how long you have suffered or how hopeless the case may be, Dr. Harvey's Quality Pepto-Tonic and Blood Purifier at $1 a bottle will restore you to perfect health.
On the Wellcome Collection's website, you can find a really cool article by Amelia Soth showing various different miracle cure-alls throughout the ages. And at the bottom, you see an advert for radium solution. As Amelia writes, "Our most recent panacea was also the deadliest. Discovered in 1898, radium was heralded as the modern philosopher's stone, and perhaps even the wellspring of life itself. Soon, radium was everywhere. Lotions, candies, toothpastes, socialite, even buyers downed several bottles of Radithor daily until his bones disintegrated. His death ended the radium boom, but his teeth still literally glow." And right now, we have the modern incarnation of the search for eternal life, with big tech and bio companies getting in on the game. As reported in The Guardian by Ian Sample, companies such as Altos Labs, a contender for the most flush startup in history, backed by Silicon Valley billionaires to the tune of $3 billion, one such investor being Jeff Bezos. Their aim is to rejuvenate human cells, not with an eye on immortality, but to stave off the diseases of old age that inexorably drive us to the grave. Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and the big data analyst Palantir, has poured millions into anti-aging research, notably the Methuselah Foundation, a non-profit that aims to make 90 the new 50 by 2030. So I think we can see the desire feels fairly ubiquitous, dare I say universal, possibly even eternal. But I wonder why that is, why we keep looking for some magic potion to dull the Grim Reaper's scythe, outside of the obvious feelings of not wanting to say goodbye to all that we know and love. I wonder if there's more to it than that. Perhaps it's because humans are aware that we have a very limited window to do something with our lives. And we think without the constraint of time, maybe we can become what we're supposed to be. Or perhaps it's just death represents the uncontrollable, and we don't like feeling powerless in the face of something so important. I read a blog post on Psychology Today about this. The author, Dean Rickles, PhD, makes a great point. He says, "Yet these days we are peppered with talk of extending life, even to the point of immortality. The friends of the singularity are pushing hard for this future. Now I admit it, I'd like more life, but immortality, that's very different. Even 10,000 years sounds rather excessive. I imagine that I could handle 1,000 years, but beyond that, existence may begin to grate. Besides, we must consider if it even makes sense to speak in terms of the immortality of a person, or even of extremely long lives. If memory doesn't fail to hold earlier stages, at some point it would still be difficult to speak of a single individual spanning these lengths, as opposed to a number of stages that have the quality of different people. We would change interests radically, I'm sure, maybe alter our preferred appearance. At some point we might even be forced to simulate death, to let our old selves die and allow for new things to emerge and surprise us. I think that's a fascinating point, and it's worth talking about. Who would you become after hundreds of years, or centuries, or eternity? Would the me who lived 1,000 years even be me at the end of it? And if not, it does beg the question, why should this version of me here worry about any of this then? Why focus on wanting or trying to live forever? Even if you find a way to make your body last that long, this version of you who's listening to me now, would still be long gone after a few hundred years. So I kind of go back on maybe what I should and can focus on is who I am and where I am right now, and making the most of the time I currently have, rather than wishing for more of it. Because the future is always coming, but it's never here. And we live here.
Welcome to the world of tomorrow. Climb aboard.
I'd like to end this video on another legendary search for immortality from perhaps one of the greatest tales ever told, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story was recorded 4,000 years ago. It tells of the legendary king Gilgamesh and his trials. To abridge it a little, Gilgamesh, who I've sometimes read called the Babylonian Heracles, was so powerful and unrivaled in the world that the gods decided to make an equal who could go toe-to-toe with him, a man of the wild called Enkidu. But after initially clashing, the two eventually become great friends. They go on many journeys and adventures, but unfortunately, Enkidu sadly dies, which brings great sadness to Gilgamesh, both for the loss of his friend and brother-in-arms, but also at the realization that death can come for us all. If it came for Enkidu, it will also eventually come to great Gilgamesh. So he goes in search for Utnapishtim, a man who is said to have found the secret of eternal life, who is sometimes called the Faraway, because he lives at the mouth of all rivers at the ends of the world. It is said that Utnapishtim survived a great flood that killed many by constructing a large boat at the behest of a god. We modern audiences, of course, see many similarities in his story and the story of Noah from the Bible. When Gilgamesh finally finds Utnapishtim, he implores the Faraway to reveal the secrets of eternal life, begging him, telling him how Enkidu was like a brother, the tears he'd wept at the passing of Enkidu, and the fear of death that had taken hold of the mighty hero Gilgamesh's heart since seeing his friend fall. We read in Myths of Babylonia and Assyria by Donald A. Mackenzie Utnapishtim's reply. He says, Utnapishtim made answer, reminding the pilgrim, all men must die. Men built houses, sealed contracts, disputed one with another, and sowed seeds in the earth. But as long as they did so, and the rivers rose in flood, so long would their fate endure. Nor could any man tell when his hour would come. The god of destiny measured out the span of life. He fixed the day of death, but never revealed his secrets. After this, Gilgamesh is told by Utnapishtim that if he stays awake for 6 days and 7 nights, he'll be granted immortality. Gilgamesh, however, is overpowered by exhaustion and falls asleep. Even after failing this test, he learns of a plant that can restore youth, so he retrieves it from the ocean's depths. However, during his journey home, a serpent steals the plant from him, bringing yet more sadness to Gilgamesh. He breaks down in tears and laments and accepts his fate. When he returns to the city of Uruk, he asks his ferryman to inspect the city's powerful walls, and the epic ends. The story of Gilgamesh, like I mentioned, is around 4,000 years old. It is, in fact, the oldest existing literary work that we have. We don't know for sure if Gilgamesh truly existed, though many scholars believe he was likely a real king whose deeds were exaggerated over time, stories of his real life becoming intertwined and eventually overshadowed by legend. Again, big old pinch of salt. But all the same, whether he was a real person or not, I think there's something interesting we can take from the fact that the story ends with the great Gilgamesh not finding a trick for immortality. The most powerful man in the world seems to accept his mortality, and though he would wish to live forever, understands that it is not something he has control over. I've even read it suggested that his final words about inspecting the city walls allude to a realization that it's the things that you build that are meant to last forever, not you yourself. 4,000 years ago, this sentiment was carved into stone, and I imagine that carving as one end of a rope that stretches forward through time, past the late Bronze Age, past the Iron Age, past classical antiquity, past the Middle Ages, past the Renaissance, past the Industrial Age, and threading its way into modern times. And now, I am holding a section of that rope in my hand as I tell Gilgamesh's story to you. And as I look forward into the distant future, I see the rope extending onwards, stretching far further than my eyes allow me to see. And I can't help but think, how's that for immortality?